Welcome back to Conversations about Bookbinding. Today, we're diving deep into something really important for anyone who loves books. Caring for your collection, you know?
Yeah, taking care of those books.
Exactly. And we've got some incredible insights from Edward Patrick Krantz, the Honey Badger binder himself. He curated this whole deep dive just for us bookbinders, collectors, and anyone who's passionate about books. We're going to go beyond those basic tips and tricks and really get into it.
Absolutely. We're talking the science of book preservation, the hidden dangers lurking right in our homes, and even why those little sticky notes can be a book's worst enemy.
Okay, so let's get started. Edward Patrick Krantz really emphasizes starting with the basics. It might seem obvious, but it's surprising how often people forget clean hands.
Right. It's easy to forget that the oils and all the stuff on our fingers can transfer to those pages, and over time that can lead to discoloration stains, even make the paper more brittle.
It's amazing how such a simple thing can have such a big impact. In fact, Edward Patrick Krantz washes his hands before he handles any book, which I gotta admit, I'm gonna start doing too. Now let's talk about the environment. Edward Patrick Krantz is all about what he calls the Goldilocks zone for book storage.
Oh, he's spot on with that. Temperature and humidity are crucial for preserving books. If it's too hot, those paper fibers, they dry out and become brittle, and then they're more likely to crack and just crumble.
So like a cracker that's been left out in the air.
Exactly like that. And on the flip side, if it's too humid, well, then you're just inviting mold. And that can leave those ugly stains and honestly weaken the paper beyond repair.
I'm guessing that musty smell you get in old books is a sign of a humidity problem.
That's a sure sign that the environment might be too damp for those books.
So what's the sweet spot? What should we be aiming for?
Well, Edward Patrick Krantz recommends keeping the temperature between 65 and 72 degrees Fahrenheit. And the humidity, the relative humidity, that should be between 30 and 50%. So think of it like a comfortable living space, not just for you, but for your books, too.
Makes sense. So let's talk about location. Where are the worst places to keep your books? I'm assuming attics and basements are a big no-no.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. Those places are known for wild temperature swings and humidity changes. But here's something a lot of people don't realize. You also want to avoid keeping books near heat sources like radiators or fireplaces.
That makes sense. Heat dries out the pages, right?
Exactly.
Yeah.
And speaking of things people overlook, we got to talk about the silent killer of books. Direct sunlight.
I know sunlight can fade ink, but is it really that damaging?
It's more than just fading. Sunlight, especially that UV radiation, can actually break down the chemicals in the paper and the ink. It's irreversible damage.
Wow, I had no idea it was that serious. Okay, so we've covered temperature, humidity, and location. What about shelving?
Choosing the right shelving is key. First, you want sturdy bookshelves that can hold the weight of your collection without sagging or warping.
Solid wood seems like a good option, but what about metal?
Metal can be good too, but make sure it's coated to prevent rust. You don't want that staining your books. And whatever you do, avoid those cheap particle board shelves.
Oh, I've learned that lesson the hard way. Those things sag just by looking at them. So we've got our sturdy shelves. How should we arrange the books?
Spacing is important. You want good air circulation to prevent mold, so don't pack them in too tightly.
So open shelving is better than closed cabinets then?
Well, that's a good question. Both have pros and cons. Open shelving lets the air circulate better, but it also exposes your books to dust and light.
So it's a trade-off.
Yeah, exactly. Edward Patrick Krantz suggests rearranging your books every once in a while, just to give every part of the shelf a break from the pressure.
I like that tip. It's like giving your books a little spa day,
Yeah.
rotating them so they don't get stiff.
I like that analogy. Now let's switch gears a bit and talk about some of the common enemies that can damage our books. Dust might seem harmless, but it can actually hide mold spores, and those spores can damage the paper over time.
So regular dusting is a must.
Absolutely use a soft cloth or a gentle brush, and avoid harsh chemicals or anything abrasive that can damage those delicate materials.
And what about water damage? That seems like a book's worst nightmare.
Oh, water is the ultimate book destroyer. Keep liquids far away from your books. And if you're worried about water damage, think about storing valuable books in waterproof containers.
Okay, good advice. Now, on a slightly creepier note,
Uh-huh.
what about those tiny book-eating monsters, insects?
Insects can be a real nightmare. Regular inspections are key to catching infestations early. Look for tiny holes in the pages or the binding or any little droppings. That usually means you've got an unwelcome guest.
And if we find evidence of pests,
There are book-safe insect repellents you can use. Cedar blocks or sachets filled with lavender or cloves are good natural deterrents.
okay, good to know. So we've covered environmental control, shelving those pesky dust bunnies and bookworms. But before we move on, I have to ask about something that's been a bit of a debate in the book world. Sticky notes.
Ah, yes, those little devils. They might seem innocent, but that adhesive can react with the paper over time, causing discoloration staining and even weakening the pages.
Yeah, and I found that they can be a real pain to remove without tearing the paper.
You're right, and that's why a lot of bookbinders and conservators recommend avoiding them altogether.
So what are some good alternatives for marking pages or making notes?
Bookmarks are always a good option, or if you need to take notes, keep a separate notebook just for your reading. And if you absolutely have to use sticky notes, at least go for the removable kind that are made for paper.
Great advice.
Yeah.
Now let's talk about something that's especially important for those of us who love those big, heavy books. You know, the kind that weigh a ton and make your wrists ache after a while?
Oh, I know exactly what you mean. The problem with those is that holding them for a long time can put a lot of strain on the binding, and over time that can cause the spine to crack or weaken.
So how can we protect those heavyweights while still enjoying our reading?
Book cradles or reading stands are your best friends. They support the book and take the pressure off the binding so you can enjoy those big books comfortably without causing damage.
And they look really elegant on a bookshelf, too.
Yeah, they do add a touch of class. Now we've covered a lot of ground, but before we move on, I want to touch on something important for anyone handling rare or valuable books: professional conservation.
Oh, I'm eager to learn more about this. When would you say it's absolutely necessary to call in a professional conservator?
Well, if you have a book that's showing significant damage, like water stains, mold, insect damage, a detached cover, brittle pages, it's definitely time to call in the experts. They have the knowledge and the skills to assess the damage and figure out the best course of action.
So what are some things conservators look for when they're assessing a book?
They'll look at the materials the book's made of, the type of binding, how extensive the damage is, and the overall structural integrity.
It sounds incredibly specialized.
Book conservation is a fascinating field. It blends science art and a deep understanding of historical bookbinding techniques. They use all sorts of methods to repair and restore books, mending tears, reinforcing bindings, treating paper for mold, even creating custom enclosures to protect those fragile volumes.
That's amazing what they can do. So we've covered a lot in this first part of our deep dive.
We've talked about environmental control, choosing the right shelving, protecting books from those common enemies, and the role of professional conservation.
But we've only just scratched the surface. Stay tuned for part 2 of our deep dive, where we'll delve even deeper into the science behind book preservation and explore some advanced techniques for caring for your collection.
We'll be back after a short break. Welcome back to Conversations about Bookbinding.
Yeah, last time we were talking about Edward Patrick Krantz's Goldilocks zone concept, and I'd love to dig a little deeper into the science behind those ideal temperature and humidity ranges.
Oh, it's fascinating stuff. So let's start with high temperatures. As the temperature goes up, the moisture inside those paper fibers starts to evaporate.
So it's like drying clothes on a clothesline.
Yeah, that's a great way to think about it. Just like clothes get stiff and brittle when they dry out too fast, paper fibers do the same thing when they lose moisture too quickly.
So it's not just about extreme heat, but also about those rapid temperature changes.
Exactly. Those sudden swings can make the paper expand and contract, which puts stress on the fibers and weakens the paper over time.
Okay, that makes sense. Now, what about the other end of the spectrum, humidity? We know high humidity can lead to mold, but what's the science behind that?
Well, mold loves those warm, damp environments. And paper fibers, they're porous, so they're like the perfect breeding ground for mold spores. Once those spores take hold, they release enzymes that break down the cellulose in the paper. And that's what causes those stains, the weakening, and that classic musty odor.
Ugh, I can practically smell it now. So what about low humidity? Is that as bad as high humidity?
It might not be as obvious as mold, but low humidity can be just as sneaky. When the air's too dry, paper loses moisture and becomes brittle. It's more susceptible to cracking and tearing.
It seems like maintaining that Goldilocks zone is all about balance.
It's about finding that sweet spot where the paper fibers aren't too dry or too moist. That way they can keep their flexibility and strength.
So what are some practical tools we can use to monitor the temperature and humidity in our homes?
A good thermometer and hygrometer are essential for any book lover. You can find them at most hardware stores or online.
And where's the best place to put them?
Ideally, you want to put them where your books are stored, about the same height as the middle of your bookshelves. That'll give you the most accurate reading of the environment your books are actually in.
Makes sense. Now let's say we're keeping a close eye on the temperature and humidity. What are some other steps we can take to create a safe haven for our books?
Well, let's talk about shelving and containers. Edward Patrick Crans is a big believer in choosing the right materials. Solid wood shelves are always a classic choice.
I love the look of wood, but what about metal? I've seen some really nice metal bookshelves lately.
Metal can be good too, but make sure it's coated to prevent rust. You don't want those pages getting stained.
Good point. What about those old antique bookshelves you see in libraries and historic homes? Are those safe for storing books?
Antique shelves can be beautiful. They add a touch of history to your space, but it's important to inspect them carefully before you load them up with books.
What should we be looking for?
Look for any signs of damage, like warping, cracking, or loose joints. Also, watch out for any signs of insects, like tiny holes or sawdust. If you're not sure about the condition of an antique bookshelf, it's best to talk to a professional restorer or conservator. You don't want to risk damaging your books.
Great advice.
Yeah.
Now, Edward Patrick Krantz also mentioned using containers for book storage. When would you say that's necessary?
Containers are especially good for protecting valuable or fragile books from dust, light, and pests. They're also great for storing books that you're not currently reading or displaying.
What types of containers are best for long-term storage?
You want to look for archival quality boxes made from acid-free and lignin-free materials. Those materials are really important because they won't release harmful chemicals, so you don't have to worry about your books yellowing and becoming brittle over time.
I've seen those boxes online and in those archival supply stores. What makes them different from regular cardboard boxes?
Well, regular cardboard boxes often contain acids and lignins that can seep into the paper and cause damage over time. Archival quality boxes are specially designed to be chemically inert. That means they won't interact with the books and cause them to deteriorate.
So they're like a little protective cocoon for our books.
Exactly. They create a stable and safe environment to help preserve those books for years to come.
That's great. Now I gotta ask, what about those of us who are short on space? I have books crammed into every nook and cranny of my apartment.
Oh, I understand the struggle. Limited space is a common problem for book lovers. But even in a small space, there are things you can do to protect your collection.
Like what? I'm all ears.
Well, first, prioritize. If you have limited space, focus on storing your most valuable or fragile books in the best conditions.
Yeah, those are the ones I'd be most heartbroken to lose, so that makes sense.
Exactly. And get creative with your storage solutions. Think vertically. Use wall space with shelves, or consider underbed storage bins for books you're not currently reading.
I like those ideas. It's all about making the most of what you have.
Exactly. And don't forget, you can always rotate your collection. If you have books in storage, bring them out every now and then and give your current books a break. This not only helps preserve your books, but it also lets you rediscover some old favorites.
It's like having a mini library rotation.
Exactly. Now, let's shift gears a bit and talk about those moments when damage happens. Accidents happen, but knowing how to handle them can make all the difference.
Okay, I'm a little nervous, but let's do it.
Oh.
What are some common book injuries and how can we treat them?
Well, one of the most common is torn pages. If you find a tear, don't panic. You can use archival quality tape to mend it. Just make sure the tape is acid-free and designed for paper repair. You can find this type of tape online or at art supply stores.
Okay, what about those dreaded coffee rings? I'm always worried about spilling my morning coffee on a book.
Ugh, coffee rings. For minor stains, you can try gently blotting the stain with a soft, clean cloth and distilled water. But be careful, don't rub the stain because that can spread it and damage the paper fibers. If the stain is really stubborn or if you're dealing with a valuable book, it's best to talk to a professional conservator.
Right, that makes sense. I've heard that conservators can do some pretty amazing repairs. What are some of the most common things they do?
Conservators have a whole range of skills and techniques. They can repair tears and stains, of course, but they can also rebind books, repair damaged spines, and even create custom enclosures to protect fragile or valuable volumes.
It sounds like they're big whisperers. So if we have a book that needs more than just basic first aid, we should call in the experts.
Exactly. They have the experience and knowledge to assess the damage and figure out the best way to fix it. Sometimes a simple repair is all that's needed, but other times more complex treatments might be necessary.
It's amazing how much goes into caring for books. It's definitely more than just dusting them off once in a while. But I'm starting to see how all these little details can really make a difference in the long run.
That's the key takeaway. Preserving your book collection is an ongoing process. It takes attention to detail, a little knowledge, and a lot of love and care.
Well said. Now, I know we have one more part to this deep dive.
Well,
What can we expect to explore next time?
Next time, we'll be focusing on the art and craft of bookbinding. We'll explore the techniques and materials that have been used throughout history to create those beautiful and durable books. We'll also delve into the world of book conservation, learning about the tools and methods used to preserve and restore damaged books.
Oh, I can't wait.
Yeah.
Welcome back to Conversations about Bookbinding. We've covered so much already, from environmental control to shelving to even rescuing books from coffee spills.
Yeah, it's been a lot.
But now I think it's time to shift gears a bit and delve into a topic that's really at the heart of bookbinding, understanding how the way we handle books impacts their lifespan.
Absolutely.
Edward Patrick Krantz is really passionate about this. He believes that even the tiniest actions can make a huge difference over time.
Oh, he's right on the money with that.
I think it's easy to forget that books are delicate, especially older ones or antique volumes.
Mm-hmm.
You know, the way we hold them, turn the pages, even how we put them on the shelves. It can all add up to wear and tear.
It really can.
He mentioned that clean hands are the first line of defense. And I've been trying to be more mindful of that myself, but I never really realized just how much damage those oils and all that grime from our fingers could cause.
Yeah, it's not something we think about a lot, but over time, those things can lead to discoloration, staining, and even speed up how fast the paper fibers break down.
I've definitely seen those brown, almost greasy fingerprints on some old books. It's a pretty powerful reminder that our touch leaves a mark, literally.
It really does. And it highlights how important it is to be aware of how we handle those books.
So besides clean hands, what are some other handling techniques that can help preserve our books?
Well, let's start with turning the pages. It seems simple enough, but there's a right way and a wrong way to do it.
Oh, I'm all ears.
yeah.
I have to admit, I've been guilty of dog-earing pages in the past. Is that like a major book carry? No.
Dog-earing is definitely not a good practice. It weakens the paper, makes it more likely to tear, and honestly, it just doesn't look very good.
Yeah, you're right about that. So what's the proper technique?
Use your fingertip or a bookmark to gently lift the corner of the page and turn it carefully. Avoid using your fingernails or anything sharp that could scratch or tear the paper.
What about cracking the spine of a book to make it lay flat? Is that as bad as some people say it is?
Forcing a book open too far can really stress the spine and the binding, and over time that can lead to cracking, splitting, or even the cover coming off completely. Think of it like bending a piece of metal back and forth. Eventually, it's going to weaken and break.
That makes sense. So what's the alternative?
If you need to keep a book open for a while, use a book cradle or a reading stand to support it properly. Those tools take the pressure off the spine and let you read comfortably without damaging the book.
We talked about book cradles and reading stands earlier, and I have to say I'm a big fan. They're not just practical, but they also look really nice on a desk or bookshelf.
They do add a touch of elegance to any reading space. Now let's move on to shelving and storage. The way we arrange our books on the shelves can affect their condition too.
I usually just try to cram as many books onto a shelf as possible. Is there a wrong way to do it?
Overcrowding is a common mistake. Packing them in too tightly can put pressure on the spines and make it hard to take them out without causing damage. Give your books a little breathing room.
So it's not just about the type of shelving, but how we organize them on the shelves too.
Exactly. And when you're putting books on the shelf, try to keep them upright and avoid leaning them at an angle. Leaning can put uneven pressure on the spines and bindings, which can warp them over time.
Okay, I'm taking notes. I never realized how much thought goes into just arranging books on a shelf.
It's all about creating a supportive and stable environment for your books so they can last a long time.
Speaking of lasting a long time, let's talk about those inevitable accidents. What are your tips for dealing with book mishaps?
Well, first, don't panic. A lot of minor book injuries can be fixed with a little know-how. We already talked about fixing torn pages with archival quality tape.
Right, and blotting stains with distilled water. But what about more serious damage, like water damage or a cover coming off?
For those situations, it's best to get in touch with a professional conservator. They have the expertise and the right tools to handle complex repairs and restorations.
So it's like taking your book to the doctor.
Yeah, that's a great way to put it. Conservators are trained to assess the damage, stabilize the book, and do whatever repairs are necessary to preserve its structure and its beauty.
It's amazing how much skill and artistry goes into book conservation. It's like a blend of science and craftsmanship.
You're absolutely right. Book conservation is a highly specialized field. It requires a deep understanding of bookbinding techniques, material science, and preservation ethics.
Well, I think we've covered a ton of information in this deep dive, from the science of book preservation to the art of handling and repairing these precious objects.
It's been a fascinating journey for sure.
And I hope we've encouraged our listeners to be more aware and proactive in taking care of their own book collections.
I hope so too.
I know I've learned so much. And I'm really grateful to Edward Patrick Krantz, the Honey Badger Binder, for sharing his expertise and his passion with us. His insights have been invaluable.
He really is a master of his craft, and his dedication to preserving these literary treasures is truly inspiring.
So to all of you bookbinders, collectors, and enthusiasts out there, remember that caring for your books is a journey. It's about learning and discovering. Embrace the challenge, explore the possibilities, and most importantly, cherish the magic that these books hold.
Well said. And until next time, happy reading.